Just yesterday, reports confirmed a fragile ceasefire between Israel and Iran, brokered after intense U.S. involvement. President Donald Trump announced this truce, claiming it followed U.S. airstrikes on June 21st that targeted Iran's nuclear facilities at Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan. Trump initially boasted these strikes obliterated Iran's nuclear program, but a U.S. intelligence report leaked on June 25th revealed a more sobering truth. The strikes only set Iran's capabilities back by months, not years. Satellite imagery from Maxar Technologies shows damage to Fordow's ventilation shafts, but the underground facilities remain largely intact. This gap between rhetoric and reality has sparked debate in Washington. Did the U.S. achieve a strategic win, or did it escalate a conflict without lasting impact? For American listeners, this matters. The U.S. military's direct involvement, using B-2 bombers and GBU-57 bunker buster bombs, marks a bold shift from diplomacy to force. Vice President J.D. Vance argued on Meet the Press that Iran must now negotiate, but Iran's President Masoud Pezeshkian signaled openness to talks, telling the UAE's leader on June 24th that Iran seeks only legitimate rights and not nuclear weapons. Yet, Iran's missile strikes on Israel, which killed 28 according to Israeli reports, and a retaliatory attack on a U.S. base in Qatar, show Tehran's not backing down. The ceasefire, if it holds, averts a wider war, but it's shaky. Israel intercepted 3 Iranian drones on June 24th, and Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Khamenei vowed to continue punishing Israel. Why should Americans care? First, oil prices. The ceasefire has calmed markets, with the S&P 500 up 1.1% on June 24th as oil prices dipped. But any flare-up could spike gas prices, hitting your wallet. Second, national security. U.S. forces in the Middle East, from Qatar to Lebanon, are on high alert, and Iran's threats to retaliate against American interests raise the stakes. Third, diplomacy's future. The UN and IAEA are pushing for talks, but Trump's team, including Secretary of State Marco Rubio, insists Iran must not mess around. Will this lead to a new nuclear deal or more brinkmanship? Israel's recent actions began with airstrikes on June 13th, targeting Iran's Natanz facility, destroying above-ground infrastructure and damaging underground centrifuges, per IAEA reports. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu called these strikes a preemptive blow against Iran's nuclear threat. When Iran retaliated with missile attacks, killing 28 Israelis, Israel escalated, hitting Tehran's Evin prison and military sites. Iran's health ministry reported 610 deaths, including 13 children, from these strikes. The U.S. joined on June 21st, with B-2 bombers dropping GBU-57 bunker busters on Fordow and Natanz, and Tomahawk missiles on Isfahan. Israel's goal? Cripple Iran's nuclear program and deter further aggression. Why does Israel push so hard? Security. Iran's enriched uranium stockpile, reportedly near bomb grade before the strikes, threatens Israel's existence, especially with Tehran's proxies like Hezbollah active in Lebanon. A senior Israeli official told the Washington Post that Isfahan was annihilated, and Fordow and Natanz severely damaged. Yet, satellite imagery from Maxar Technologies shows craters at Fordow's access roads, not total destruction. Iran claims it evacuated key materials, and IAEA Chief Rafael Grossi noted uncertainty about underground damage. This suggests Israel achieved tactical wins but not a knockout blow. For Americans, Israel's strategy raises questions. First, alliance dynamics. The U.S. provided $3.8 billion in annual military aid to Israel before the conflict, and Trump's decision to join the strikes, using 14 bunker busters and over 24 Tomahawk missiles, shows unwavering support. But House Democrats, like Jim Himes, worry about constitutional issues and long-term risks. Second, regional stability. Israel's strikes on Iran's Bushehr province and Awaz, confirmed by the IDF, risk escalating proxy wars, potentially drawing in U.S. troops stationed in Iraq or Syria. Third, domestic impact. Rising oil prices before the ceasefire hit $78.50 a barrel, affecting U.S. consumers. The S&P 500's 1.1% gain on June 24th reflects market relief, but any violation, like Iran's 3 drones on June 24th, could spike costs again. Israel's next moves hinge on the ceasefire. Netanyahu accepted it on June 24th, claiming war goals were met. But the IDF warned of new Iranian missiles hours later. Trump warned Israel against further strikes, calling it a major violation. Will Israel comply or prioritize its security? For the U.S., balancing support for Israel with de-escalation is tricky, especially as Iran's Ayatollah Khamenei vows to punish Israel. Iran's retaliation was swift after Israel's June 13th strikes on Natanz and the U.S.'s June 21st bombardment of Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan. Tehran launched over 200 missiles at Israel, killing 28, per Israeli reports, and struck a U.S. base in Qatar, injuring 2 American contractors. Iran's IRGC claimed these were precision strikes against military targets, but satellite imagery from Planet Labs showed damage to civilian areas in Israel's Nevatim airbase. On June 24th, Iran fired 3 drones toward Israel, intercepted by the IDF, testing the ceasefire's limits. Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei, in a June 25th speech, vowed to punish Israel, signaling defiance despite the truce. Internally, Iran is reeling. The strikes on Tehran, including Evin Prison, killed 610, per Iran's health ministry, with 13 children among the casualties. Protests erupted in Tehran and Awaz, with citizens decrying both the government's aggression and its failure to protect civilians. Social media posts on X show crowds chanting against President Masoud Pezeshkian, elected in 2024 as a reformist. Pezeshkian's June 24th call for talks with the UAE suggests a diplomatic pivot, but hardliners in the IRGC and Khamenei's circle demand escalation. A leaked report from Iran's Atomic Energy Organization, cited by Reuters, admits the nuclear program is severely disrupted, but claims key materials were moved pre-strike. IAEA inspectors, however, can't verify this, raising doubts about Iran's nuclear timeline. For Americans, Iran's response hits home in 3 ways. First, energy markets. The ceasefire stabilized oil prices, but Brent crude still hovers at $78, up 3% from early June, per Bloomberg. A renewed Iranian attack could push prices higher, squeezing U.S. consumers already frustrated by inflation. Second, military risks. With 3,000 U.S. troops in Iraq and Syria, Iran's proxies, like Kataib Hezbollah, could target American bases if tensions flare. A June 23 drone attack on a U.S. outpost in Jordan, blamed on Iranian-backed militias, underscores this threat. Third, diplomatic fallout. The U.S.'s strike decision sidelined the IAEA and UN, angering allies like France, who called it reckless on June 22. Trump's team, led by Secretary of State Marco Rubio, insists Iran must negotiate, but Pezeshkian's mixed signals, peace offers amid IRGC threats, complicate the path forward. Iran's domestic unrest could shift its calculus. Economic sanctions, tightened post-strikes, have slashed oil exports, and the rial hit historic lows on June 24. If protests grow, Pezeshkian may lean toward talks to ease pressure, but Khamenei's hardline stance looms large. For the U.S., navigating this requires balancing force with diplomacy to avoid a wider war. The U.S. entered this conflict decisively on June 21, launching B-2 bomber strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities at Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan, using 14 GBU-57 bunker busters and dozens of Tomahawk missiles. Trump hailed the operation as a total success, claiming it forced Iran to the negotiating table. But a June 25 U.S. intelligence leak, reported by the New York Times, revealed the strikes only delayed Iran's nuclear program by 6 to 12 months. Satellite imagery from Maxar Technologies shows surface damage but intact underground structures, echoing IAEA concerns about Iran's remaining capabilities. This gap has fueled criticism, with Senate Democrats like Chris Murphy arguing the strikes risked war without eliminating the threat. Trump's strategy hinges on maximum pressure. Post-strikes, the U.S. tightened sanctions, cutting Iran's oil exports by 20%, per Bloomberg, and deployed an additional 1,000 troops to Qatar. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, on Fox News June 24, demanded Iran abandon its nuclear ambitions entirely, while Vice President J.D. Vance called the ceasefire a U.S. victory. Yet, Iran's attack on a U.S. base in Qatar and drone launches on June 24 show Tehran's defiance. The ceasefire, brokered via the UAE, is fragile. Israel's interception of Iranian drones hours later underscores the tension. Trump warned both nations against violations, but his rhetoric, including threats to obliterate Iran, raises fears of escalation. For Americans, the stakes are tangible. First, economic impact. The ceasefire eased oil prices to $78 a barrel, but a single misstep could spike costs, hitting commuters and businesses. Second, military exposure. With 45,000 U.S. troops in the region, Iran's proxies, like Yemen's Houthis, who attacked U.S. ships in the Red Sea on June 22, pose ongoing risks. A CNN poll shows 62% of Americans fear a wider war. Third, diplomatic costs. Allies like Germany criticized the U.S. for bypassing the UN, and China's June 25 call for restraint highlights America's isolation. A new nuclear deal seems distant, with Iran's President Pezeshkian offering talks but facing IRGC pushback. Domestically, the strikes are divisive. Trump's base cheers the show of strength, but moderates worry about legalities. House Speaker Mike Johnson faces calls for a war powers vote. The 2026 midterms loom, and rising gas prices or troop casualties could shift voter sentiment. For now, the Pentagon's high alert status in Iraq and Syria signals preparedness. But at what cost? The ceasefire, brokered on June 24, 2025, holds for now, but it's a tightrope. Iran's 3 drones on June 24, intercepted by Israel, and Ayatollah Khamenei's vow to punish Israel signal ongoing defiance. Israel's Prime Minister Netanyahu, while accepting the truce, warned of swift action if Iran restarts its nuclear program. The U.S., having struck Iran's Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan sites on June 21, is pushing for talks. But the intelligence leak revealing limited strike damage, only a 6 to 12-month setback, per the Wall Street Journal, has emboldened Iran's IRGC, who claim on X to have safeguarded nuclear assets. The IAEA's inability to inspect underground sites adds uncertainty. For Americans, 3 scenarios loom. First, diplomacy. Iran's President Pezeshkian, in a June 25 Al Jazeera interview, hinted at reviving the 2015 nuclear deal if sanctions ease. Trump's team, led by Secretary of State Marco Rubio, demands stricter terms, but allies like the UK urge compromise. A deal could stabilize oil prices, now at $78 a barrel, and reduce risks to U.S. troops in Iraq and Syria. Second, escalation. If Iran resumes enrichment or Israel strikes again, the U.S. could be drawn into a broader conflict. A Politico report notes 60% of Americans oppose deeper involvement, fearing casualties and gas price spikes. Third, stalemate. The ceasefire could persist, with neither side conceding, prolonging sanctions and regional tensions. This hurts U.S. consumers and isolates America diplomatically, as China and Russia back Iran. Domestic impacts are already clear. The strikes boosted Trump's approval among Republicans, per a Fox News poll, but 55% of independents worry about war costs. Gas prices, though stabilized, remain a voter concern ahead of 2026 midterms. Protests in U.S. cities, from New York to Chicago, demand de-escalation, echoing Iran's own unrest. Meanwhile, U.S. bases in the Middle East face threats from Iran's proxies, like the June 23 Jordan attack, straining military resources. Globally, America's role is at a crossroads. Bypassing the UN for strikes alienated allies, and Russia's June 24 pledge to supply Iran with air defenses complicates U.S. strategy. Yet, the UAE's mediation shows diplomacy's potential. For American families, the question is, can the U.S. lead without fighting? A balanced approach, sanctions, talks, and readiness might work, but missteps could ignite a firestorm as we close. Listeners, this saga isn't over. The U.S., Iran, and Israel are locked in a delicate dance, and every move counts. Stay informed because your voice, through votes and advocacy, shapes what comes next.